So thanks for joining us. I always say teacher time is like in a whole nother planet than regular people time, so I really value teacher time and will do my best to give you, great, people can hear me, thank you very much, give you content that I hope you can use right away, but also be very respectful of our end time and get you out of here by 4:30. And today's topic is one that I think is one of those things we all want to do. We all want to give our students voice and choice and control and ownership over their learning. There's just a reality that we have to face that we don't want that to turn into complete, bedlam in the classroom. So that's what I want to share with you today. So let's get started. We'll look at why student choice is important. I won't spend too much time on it because I imagine if you're here, you already buy into that. But we'll give you some of the rationale behind that. And then we'll look at some strategies in the classroom that you can use. And we'll kind of do them from baby steps to, really getting your stride and then to kind of zooming along. So we'll sort of organize them that way. And then some strategies to manage that madness, if you will. So first, let's find out who we have here. If you can write in the chat box what grade you teach. If you are an upper level teacher, then what subject area do you teach? And what are you hoping to learn today from this webinar? So there's a little poll up there. If you would take a minute to just fill those out, and that'll give me a better sense of who we have on the phone. The live polls, I could watch this all day. It's sort of invigorating. So it looks like we've got lots of different content areas covered and kind of mostly 3rd through 8th grade. So that's great. These strategies that we'll go over today are applicable really K-12, but that helps me just get a sense of who we're talking to. So thank you for filling that out and letting me get to know you a little bit. All right, so let's start. It's always good to start with the research, right? People say you should do that. No, I don't mean to knock it. Actually, there is a lot of really great research out there. Most people know of Marzano. I like this quote that research has shown that providing choices to students of all age levels often increases their intrinsic motivation. Choice in the classroom has also been linked to increases in student effort, task performance, and subsequent learning. So what that says to me is, what's in it for us as the teachers, right? That if we can give that choice and it gives back to us some student engagement, if it gives back to us, more effort and more task performance and eventually more output and actual learning outcomes, that's definitely in our best interest as well as the kids, right? But I also like to think about, the reason why I sort of knocked research at first was not to knock research, but it's really about the practice. What are the benefits of student choice, practically for us in the classroom? So I like to think about that in terms of really empowering lifelong learning. We're definitely in this movement to make sure the teacher is kind of a guide and not the one sort of delivering all the information or that guide on the side. But that guide on the side won't be there forever either, right? So we need to make sure that we're giving students the ability to be lifelong learners. I also think giving student choice really honors student agency. What I mean by that is, especially in the grades we're looking at here, this sort of 3rd through 8th grade, that kind of coming into and in adolescence, the job of the teenager is to separate from their parents, to separate from adults and create their own identity, right? That's their main job, physiologically and culturally. So we need to honor that agency, that this is what they're here to do, is to find their own voice in this time. So let's honor that by giving them some student choice as well. It also increases relevance and connection. If they have some choice in what they're doing, then they can make the connections much better. We're not forced to always be the ones trying to connect what you're learning to something they might be interested. If they had a choice in it, they're making that connection, and everything becomes much more relevant. And of course, along with this, we also want this classroom culture of respect and risk-taking, and that doesn't come without trust and respect. So by offering some student choice, it really does so much for students in terms of letting them feel respected and in turn trusting you. So those are some of the benefits, both from a kind of research side, but also from the practical side. What are those things that you're going to get out of teaching this way, right, and offering this choice? But one of the things I also like to say is those benefits really only come if those choices are kind of robust choices, where we're asking kids to make robust decisions. Really, this is important because they need to be, if they're going to feel like it's, contributing to relevance and connection, it can't just be, do you want the blue sticker or the green sticker, right? So choice is deeper than that. It's something that's more meaningful, choices that actually guide their learning. So that's kind of an overarching premise that I think we need to put out there. If we want those benefits, it also needs to be, it can't just be kind of fluff choices, although sometimes those are fun too. What student choice is not? So let me take a look at that for a minute. It's not mayhem. It's not just letting them go wild and just waiting for them to come back to you, because they won't. You will end up just like that skeleton, right? It's more like this, right? You are still in control. I say who, I say when, I say who, any other 80 fans out there. So that's really important to remember. I think when you kind of first hear about or start thinking about student choice, there's a tendency to really go all the way to the end of the spectrum where you've given complete student ownership, and that's not the case. The teacher is still in charge. You are the one, you are the chief education officer of your classroom, and you are deciding what choices there are. You're deciding, all of those things. So just don't feel like it's in any way giving up your autonomy in the classroom to let students have choice. And there's also a real thing called the paradox of choice. You can, there's some fun little TED Talks on this, but the premise of it is if we think we're making our lives easier by having so many choices, right? We go to the grocery store and we want to buy, sea salt. There's 100 different kinds, right? But in fact, it's actually making our lives harder. There's so many choices, we're just stymied by it, right? We're just paralyzed by it. And the same thing can happen for our students. So I just want to put that out there, that choice is not the answer for everything all the time, every day, right? We do need to be mindful of that paradox of choice. We need to be mindful that we are the ones still that have responsibility for bringing across the learning that we need to bring across and for deciding when student choice is applicable and when it's not. So it's not something you do every day, all day. Those are a few things that I found. What do you think? You're here for a reason, so I'm definitely curious to hear what benefits have you found of student choice in your classroom? What are some things that you find as a benefit? I'll give you a few minutes here to share some ideas with each other. Oh, I'm so glad, Rachel, you brought up classroom management issues. That's so true. Sometimes we think that giving choice is going to create all these classroom management problems, but if it increases engagement, it actually decreases your classroom management issues a lot of times. Yeah, getting to share creativity. I heard someone ask recently, they're talking about Leonardo da Vinci and how his brain worked, right? It's just so out there, all these different ideas. And then they asked the question, how would he do in your classroom? And I think that's a really compelling question to ask. So what are you giving those opportunities for students to share, those kinds of students to share that creativity? The students feel like they play a role in their own learning. So important. Again, that lifelong learning piece. How much, what a service we're doing for them if they can feel like that when they leave our classrooms. I love this answer. It takes the stress of keeping them entertained off of me. So true. I always say that's my NMP, not my problem, if you're not entertained. All right, now I'll give you some strategies. And as I mentioned, we'll start with, these are the baby step strategies. These are easy ways to implement choice that don't take a lot of time or effort on your part, but will give kind of the most bang for your buck, if you will, in terms of your effort. So you may have seen these before, but choice boards. This can be, sometimes they're called homework quilts, or basically there's options a lot of times for what students can do to kind of further their learning or to reinforce their learning. And so you can just put those out as choices. You can assign points to them if you'd like, so that you have, if you do these, it's worth this many points, or if you do these a little bit more effort ones, you have more points associated with that. And on the next slide, I'll give you an example of those, and these are also in the download. So this is there's a choice board download, I believe, at the end of the webinar. Another one that's super easy is format choices. So this is one of the easiest ways you can start with is, we know what they need to learn, but let's give them a choice and how they prove that they learned it, right? It can be a piece of writing, that's what we often do, or an oral kind of presentation, but it could also be a video, a podcast, a blog, it could be a photo story, visual note-taking, narrated art, those kind of narrated cards that are strangely compelling, right, when they just sort of flip the card down again. It could be one of those, a puppet show, map, an ebook, it could be a poetry, it could be a song, newspaper editorial. And I have a lot of these written on that format choices download that I'll show you on the next screen as well. But allow yourself to be open to that, right? A lot of these take no more or less time for you to grade, if you will, or to kind of assess learning. So whether it's a formative or a summative assessment, one of the quickest ways you can do that is to offer them choice and format of how they show what they've learned. Also, if you're looking at needing to scaffold for students, students need a little bit more help. A lot of times we just throw a scaffold at them. That's a great place for choice. If you offer them, look, you could use this graphic organizer as a scaffold, or you could ask a friend, or you could, look at this video. So give them options, and a lot of times then you're putting it on them to decide whether they need that scaffolding, and they're kind of being able to identify the scaffold that best suits their needs. You can look at different kinds of student polling. Lots of times we offer a choice to the class or a question to the class. So all sorts of polling tools out there. There's Poll Everywhere, another one called Locomoda, Socrative. I haven't used some of these, but the AnswerPad, I've used that one. Facebook and Twitter also have polling features as well. So feel free to use student polling as a way to get that. Learning menus are a lot like choice boards. They're just in a little bit more of an order, and I have an example of this one on the next slide as well, which is, maybe you're going to want them to pick an appetizer, pick one of these things you could do that kind of maybe elicits background knowledge or kind of reminds them of something they've learned before. And then maybe the main course is something they have to do all 4 of these bullets. And then a dessert is totally optional, something like that. So it just kind of puts it into a metaphor and makes it a little bit more fun in a choice format. The raft strategy is one that I really like. You can use this at any point in a lesson, but I like to do it at the end. It's an acronym. It stands for Role, Audience, Format, and Topic. So I like to use it where I give them the topic. So let's say we're doing a science investigation and they're learning how electricity works and how it forms a circuit to light a light bulb. So that's the topic they need to write about. They need to write what essentially is a claim, evidence, and reasoning, but let's give them the choice to decide what role they want to play, who the audience is that they're presenting this to, and what the format is. So they could decide to be, the President of the United States, and the audience could be, I don't know, a group of kindergartners, and it could be in the format of a poem, right? So they can choose different pieces like that. But it gets them, like someone mentioned earlier, using some creativity, but it keeps them on topic. So you're learning, you're assessing whether they learned what you need them to, but they have some choice in that role, audience, and format. I know these are illegible here, but these, I just wanted to give you a picture of the downloads that you have. So there's that choice board with points. So this is just a Word document. You can edit it, add it in what you would like them to do, but they would essentially check it in the first column what they want to do, and then they have the points associated with that activity. There's those format choices, some of those that I was blabbering off there, just in case you need a reminder of the different options that students can use, and there's countless others. The menu, here's just a blank template for that as well. As I mentioned, you might have an appetizer where you would complete one, the main dish complete all, but all that's editable. You can change it up and use it how you'd like. The raft is just some options for what they could choose from for audience and the format as well as the topic. So sorry that's kind of illegible in my screen, but the download is clear. All right, so now we'll move. These are what I call the moving along strategies. Those are baby step strategies, still require a little bit different mindset maybe as a teacher, but nothing that is going to be really, really hard or really, really disruptive, right? So here's a little bit, something a little bit further down the spectrum. So we often use writing prompts. We'll ask the kids to write about something. So one thing you can, entertain the idea or explore the idea of doing away with writing prompts and just have them open up a blog. And so the important thing is that they are writing on a regular basis, and that you're giving them the fodder with the content you need, and just open it up, have them just write blogs. And oftentimes they're going to probably surpass the writing that you were asking for them in that writing prompt, because one, they got to choose how they're going to connect the content, but also there's a feeling of an authentic audience. So now someone could actually find this blog, someone could read this blog, they could send that link to somebody. So there's an authenticity to it that also increases their engagement. Anytime you have something where you're going to provide the materials, just ask yourself, do I need to provide these materials, or could I give them a choice of materials? Just something to think about. And I put this in the moving along strategies a little bit, further on the continuum, just because, you might have to provide a little bit more materials, or you might have to be flexible in what you ask them to do. But something to think about. This one's a little more controversial, but do you want them to choose their groups? So sometimes this is the last thing you want with certain classrooms. It just does not work, and you will know when you have one of those classrooms where those kids cannot be allowed to be together, or it's just not going to work. But a lot of times when you actually ask them to choose their groups, even if they're choosing a friend group, they actually work better that way. So you use your judgment for your classrooms, but it is an option for you. If you don't feel comfortable having them choose their own groups, you have different grouping strategies, let them choose that. We could group by this or we could group by that, and give them a choice in that. Another kind of one related to that would be flexible seating, and that could be letting them decide where they sit, or just offering flexible seating in your classroom, right? A place where they have a desk set up, a place where they have a collaborative table set up, a place where they have more of a reading nook, kind of loungy type setup. So giving those options for places and environments to work in is a nice way to add choice. Book choice is a nice one, when you are working on a topic, to have selected several books that they can choose from, and then they pick from that. So it's a fairly common one. But I put it in a little bit moving along, not just baby steps, just because it does require you to have read a few more books. It does require you to be open to having to assess along different book choices. So it is a little bit on that part, more work for you, but it adds if you want them to read, they've got to have some level of choice. Otherwise, it's just a slog for them. I mean, how would you like to do that, right? Just have your books dictated to you all the time. All right. And then the idea of a genius hour. So giving them an hour to pursue something that is of interest to them. So I'm sure you've all heard about the different companies. Google does this, where they give their employees time to pursue something that's a passion of theirs, and they've come up with amazing discoveries from that. So, something to explore with your students. If you're interested in that, why don't you save that for Genius Hour and look it up then. It's also a way to kind of divert when class gets off track, to always sort of tell them they can look at that during Genius Hour. All right, now we'll look at the Speedster Strategies. This is when you really feel comfortable with student choice and you really want to take it a step further. These are ones that have a lot of impact, but truthfully they do require not necessarily more work on your part, but just a mindset change that really is open to having different things happening in the classroom. So one is, and this might be a little bit of a misnomer, but choosing their own learning targets. So obviously you have a certain standard that you're trying to get them to, but think of this of learning targets in terms of I can statements, and giving them the kind of autonomy to create their own I can statements. So if this is what we're studying, how are you going to show that you learned that? I can do this, and that means. I use those two stems. I can, and then that means. So if you ask the students to kind of provide their own progression of if here's where we're trying to get, you tell me what you need to learn to get there and what it's going to look like. So you have them create those I can and that means statements on the way to the learning target. You can also, to some degree, let them choose their learning rate. Not everybody learns at the same speed, and that sometimes is controversial too, but a lot of times, whether that's retakes, right, being able to take something again, our goal should be to reward learning, right? We get to take a driver's license test multiple times, that does happen in real life. So letting them think about how long they need to take something and to learn something, and let them choose that learning rate is something obviously within reason. There are certain things that you have to get in grades at a certain time, and I get that. But where you can, let's give them some freedom. Certainly there's also the opportunity for them to do independent study or independent investigation. So if you do something like a curiosity journal where you have them write questions, or when they finish an investigation you ask them what questions they still have, save time at the end of the year for them to pursue those questions that they've been listing, and they can choose something that they want to study on their own. There's also the opportunity to have students manage different projects that you have for your classroom. So we actually tried this recently, and honestly I did not think this was going to work, but we were trying to plan a fundraiser, and we said, think about how you would do this in 5 steps. And so each of us wrote on our piece of paper what we thought would be the first step. We passed it to the next person, and they, added to that what they thought would be the second step, or if they didn't have what they had as the first step, they added that. Essentially, we went around 5 different times, and by the 5th one, we had a really good project management kind of setup. So that's something to try, to sort of 5 steps, but let them manage something, not even academic related, that you need to do in your classroom. Mm-hmm. Another one you can do is figure out where you can align your content to some kind of charity. If you're working on compound interest, is there something that you can invest your money, maybe raise funds and invest your money and give to a charity, and have them choose a charity? So that's something you can kind of think about. Is there a way to align your content to some sort of philanthropic cause? Similar to that, you could also have them, if you are going to do that, have them choose the fundraiser. Align your content to that charity and actually say, well, how could we do this? We could do a bake sale, or we could do, something, give them the freedom to choose something that's a little bit more interesting to them for that fundraiser. So those are some things that are, a little bit more out there, a little bit further on that continuum of choice, but things to consider as you are looking to add more student choice to your classroom. So really quick, if you can answer here, we're curious to know which of these resonate. So we'll put up a poll of the ones I just went through. So click on as many as you think you might try in your classroom, and if you have any other strategies you'd like to recommend, you can add those into the chat. We've got a few people trying some of those little bit more daring ones down below at the end. That's nice. Okay, lots of ideas on flexible seating on Pinterest. That's a great suggestion too. There are some really fun things there, so that's a great topic to take a look at. Thank you, Randy. So thank you for sharing that, and I encourage you to try them. Let us know how it goes. Share any more. But now let's talk a little bit more about how do you manage that madness. So just some strategies for yourself to keep it sane, right? So one is start slow. If you don't have a whole lot of choice in your classroom right now, just pick one of those baby step strategies, and if you feel like you're doing that a little bit, but you just want to add a little bit more, just add in one at a time. Don't try to do all of those at one time. Start slow. The other piece that I think is really important is making time for reflection. Giving students time to reflect on their own work gives them the opportunity to become better decision makers, right? They develop those decision-making skills, and they can target their own new areas for growth. So the more you give students time for reflection, whether it's specifically in the choices that they made or just in your own content kind of academic studies, reflection is so important for them developing those social-emotional skills to be able to handle the choice. Be explicit about your expectations. So, don't just think you're going to turn over the choice and they're going to do exactly what you want them to do. You do need to be explicit about what's expected. These are the things you have choice in. These are the things you don't. These are the things that I expect to see in order to continue giving you that choice. So be very explicit about that. Again, talking about that paradox of choice, avoid giving too many choices. So stick to, it depends on what it is, but for most things, stick to about 3 to 5 choices. So for example, that format menu, I wouldn't recommend you just give that format menu to the students. That's for you to look at and see which 3 to 5 of these might I suggest to the students, because otherwise it just gives overwhelm, and they don't actually get excited about it, and all of a sudden feels like a chore. Or they spend more time figuring out what format they want to use instead of actually doing it. The other is trust your gut. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, you know your students, you know which class you have, for this particular year, and if it just doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel like that's going to go, it's always a fine line, right? You want to challenge yourself, you want to push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, but trust your gut when you feel like it's going to be too much. And then the last one is maybe obvious, but the students really, respond to your energy. And if you're feeling nervous about it, if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, this is going to go into chaos, it probably will, right? So be sure and kind of just relax. Make sure that you put on your poker face. Even if you are freaked out about it, don't let them see that. Be relaxed about it because they will definitely feed off of that energy. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. Again, a few strategies for you to try, a little bit about managing the madness. We hope you will join us for more of these. We do them every month. Some other things that we have, if you'd like to look at some more things, is subscribing to our blog. That's the Inquiry Insider. And we'd also like to invite those of you who can to come to our conference this summer. It's called Science on the Grand. It's July 15th and 16th. And we have early bird pricing for that right now. It's a 2-day conference on everything STEAM.